Hello and welcome to a unique episode of the Dynasty Zoltan podcast. This one's going to be a little bit different here. If you've listened to the podcast before, or of course, if you're one of my patrons, you're probably familiar with the Dynasty Diagnostic package that I offer. And it's really, for me, the most exciting thing that I offer to my patrons, where I do an in-depth analysis of all of your teams and leagues. This is including, an in-depth numerical analysis going through a pretty complicated model, as well as myself personally looking through all of your teams and giving you some suggestions. So I got my boy Dane Madoche on here. He is one of the longest, oldest patrons, one of my most loyal followers. Dane, what's up? How's it going? You want to give everyone a quick brief to where they can find some of your work on Twitter? I know you started doing some threads, which I really recommend everyone go check out.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Z. Happy to be here. Really excited to run through this diagnostic package with you. For anybody listening, you can find me at D Madoche on Twitter. You can also find me in Z's Discord. I'm there quite frequently. And yeah, I'm ready to get this rolling.
Awesome, man. So, I'm here to help you. I basically, for those listening who are unfamiliar, diagnostics are in the premium, elite tier of my package. I believe that's $14 a month. And it's something that I'll do for all of my patrons in that tier. Basically as soon as they sign up, in addition to typically once a month or whatever cadence they want. And to me, I did this for myself. I wanted a more unbiased way to look at all of my teams in the leagues. So I started by making this model just for myself and thought it was, I was using it every day. So I thought it'd be a pretty cool thing to share around.
Absolutely, I love it. It's so beneficial now that I've grown from 2 home leagues. I'm up to 11. I try to do a diagnostic probably 3 times a year just to see where my teams are sitting and what direction I need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, it's a good time to check in and get an unbiased take. And even though I have a personal bias, all of these numbers are not coming from me. So if I guess let's start off on this main page. This is what this basic portfolio diagnostics page is going to show you all of your teams, going to show you the buy-ins. This team stage is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, but is obviously very important. And then it shows where you rank among your dynasty and redraft for each of your leagues. And none of these numbers are coming from me personally. Basically, what I do is I take all of these numbers from what historically has been proven to be important to winning a dynasty league. So it looks at your players' historical production, your roster composition, the age of your team. It incorporates both upcoming redraft and dynasty rankings. My rankings are in there, but it's one piece of a much larger puzzle. So what you're getting here is ideally, in this redraft section, you're seeing how competitive is my team versus historically what it has taken in order to win a league. And then in this dynasty section, you're getting how good, how valuable is my dynasty team relative to the average or relative to the other teams in my league. Of course, this dynasty section, the roster composition matters less than it does for the redraft because it's more about value than it is about, 2023 lineup production. But yeah, this is kind of the basic page overlying all of your portfolio.
Yeah, and that's perfect. That's kind of what I wanted to get into with you, was how you created these values and your value versus the average for both dynasty and redraft. So that's some great insight to it for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So these values as standalone numbers don't tell you a whole lot. To be honest, like you could say they're out of 100. It's certainly very rare for anyone to get over 100. I'm not sure I've ever seen a team above 100. But what really matters is this value versus average. And more specifically, when we get into a league, I'll just flip to a random one here. It's the value compared to all of the other teams in your league, because every league is different. There are some leagues, and here we got the redraft rankings over here. So you can see here, there is the top team, number 1, C. Mullins at 64. The second team, A Bomb Diggity's at 60. And then we got a team at 55, a team at 53, a team at 50. So it's still a relatively narrow league in terms of you're looking at it basically up until 7th or 8th place even. These values are relatively similar. So we got a 53rd percentile team in 8th, and we got an 88th percentile team in 1st. So there's clearly a difference there, but I would say that anyone, maybe up until 8th, has a somewhat reasonable shot to compete with obviously this team in the 88th percentile and this team in the 85th percentile being the heavy favorites. So that's the way that I kind of look at it, and looking at it the other way from your perspective. So Dane here in this league is tanking. And if you have any questions about this league, we can obviously get into those specifics as well. But you're obviously tanking. What I love about this page is you can clearly see there are 2 tanking teams, right? Every single team's value over average team is -24 is the worst other than you two. So, and your values are at 12 and 22. This dude's is at 34. So I would put a lot of money right now that you two will have the top 2 picks in next year's draft. And this is just a good way to see just how disparate and how good of a job tanking you're doing for year 1 in this league.
That was a really fun startup too. I'm not too familiar with startup drafts, as I've taken quite a few orphans with Jacobian. So this was fun. I tried to make a punt, and it ended up panning out pretty well. I got some pieces that I really wanted to build around, and I collected quite a few 24 firsts. So looking forward to next year, and looking forward to selling a few guys that might be producing early, and hope to take advantage of that value spike.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get more into that league in a second, but looking again at this first page, sorry, I flipped off it. Do you have, I guess, what other questions or explanations do you think would be useful as far as this page? I guess this win nowness column is a word that I made up, so might not be self-explanatory. Basically, the average for this is 100%. So your winter is coming league, for instance, and your pot dynasty league, where you're just around 100%, I would say you are basically in between going for it and tanking. And then the weighted average age is about 25 years old. Now, if you happen to roster, Aaron Rodgers or something, that could really throw that off. But this is just another good proxy where you can see, your whole portfolio. You're 35% below average in terms of your 2023 production, but you're 17% above average for Dynasty, which basically means on the large majority of your teams, you're throwing away 2023, but that'll pay off in the long run. You can see 4 out of your 10 teams are first in Dynasty ranking. And that corresponds with the win nowness, where you're, only at 47% and 24 is your average age. So you're building up a young portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of been the goal, was target certain players that I can keep, and they'll just continue to add value and put up points.
Yeah, definitely. What are your thoughts about these team stages? Do you have any questions about what these mean?
I do. I do with a year away. Aging contender, I don't have any, but I've seen young contenders and examples. The difference between tanking rough shape and tank hard.
Yeah. So the difference here between your 2 tanking teams and your rough shape tank hard teams has a lot to do with just the construction of your roster. So if we go to these 2 tanking teams, which happen to be in the 2 dynasty leagues, you can see with this team, you are first in dynasty ranking. You are 12th in redraft ranking. You have a bunch of future first. And by the way, these team stages, these come straight from my model as well. So these aren't subjective in any way. You have a bunch of firsts. You are already tanking. So basically, I'm not telling you to switch your path at all. It's clear you're tanking. You're doing a good job of it. The difference between this squad and, for instance, a year away squad like here is that, or that's kind of a weird example, like here is this squad I actually believe could compete next year, because you have Deshaun Watt, you have 2 quarterbacks, you have 5 really good wide receivers, you have a really good tight end. You basically just don't have a running back. So as you can see, what I recommended down here is this is basically a 1-year punt build where you can take 1 more year to be bad, and then you should look to compete in 2024. These tanking teams might end up being more like a 2 years off. It really, I mean, with 6 2024 picks, you might be able to transition faster than that. But this is more saying you're in the pure value acquisition mode. The rough shape tank hard team, which looks like it was the Echo Elite League. So this team, the reason why this is a rough shape tank hard team, and it's possible that this, after your 6 first round picks in 2023, your redraft rank very well might increase. So I'd be interested if you run another diagnostic after the draft. But basically, this team's in a position where you don't have enough dynasty value yet to start transitioning into more of a win now build. So you really need to tear it down to the studs, get rid of even guys like Mac Jones, Isaiah Pacheco, and Brandon Ayuk. Those guys are young, and you can see those are a few of the guys I mentioned down here as potential sells. Those guys are young, and on a tanking team, you might not have to get rid of them. But here, you really just need the value. So even trading those guys for, a 2026 first round pick is a deal that I, recommend making in these types of teams.
Okay, perfect.
How did this draft go, by the way?
This draft, so this is our 3rd year. This is just a home league with a bunch of work buddies, and it went great. We added a 4-man taxi squad, so that is even more beneficial to me. We determined 101 off win-loss records. So yeah,
So you can just sit all of your best players and get the 101.
I took full advantage of this. I have Anthony Richardson, Bijan, Gibbs, and JSN on my taxi. Ooh. I have QJ and Kincaid on the bench right now, and so I'm just riding it out to another 0-14 season to Caleb Williams. And I just traded Isaiah Pacheco and Brandon Ayuk in this league for Treylon Burks and a 25-second.
Yeah, love that. That's another great deal. Exactly like what I was saying. Did you get the idea to make that trade from this diagnostic?
I did. I swear by these diagnostics. Any type of question that I get, I'm referring to this. I use it. I'll make notes on my phone. Just so I have something so I can stay on a plan, because I find if you need to tank and you need to tank hard, you can't get enticed by people that go on the block or other trade offers. And I find this keeps you on track. This sets a clear direction for where you need to go, and you just need to execute it. And hopefully within a couple of years, I'm going to start reaping the rewards of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it sounds like based on who you drafted here, I bet if you ran this diagnostic again, this team stage would either be a year away or maybe even like young contender. Probably not young contender yet because you have no running backs, but I guess you'd be Bijan and Gibbs, but you'll get to. I wouldn't be surprised if that this team with that basis of rookies is contending next season.
Yeah, I'm really hoping it is like that. It's a small league, right? It's
10-teamer, yeah.
Yeah, 10-team, and it's you just need to get the studs, and it all kind of started with just having a middling team even before I ran into you on Discord, quite honestly. I started hounding your DMs about making trades, and I realized that I had a bunch of aging players that just were going to be falling off a cliff soon, and I didn't want to be stuck in 6th or 7th in the league, making playoffs, getting bounced by, an 80-point loss. So I tore it down and I made it a new team.
Yeah, and it looks like you've done a great job with it, and you're spot on. One of the things that I probably say in almost every diagnostic is being in fifth to sixth place is really the worst place you can be. You basically have like a 7 or 8% shot of winning if you're in, and this is more of the stuff that my model will tell me. If you're in if you're in fifth or sixth place in a 12-team league, well, where if you're in first or second place, you have a 30% or better shot of winning. So it's really about getting to that first or second place. Um, I'd rather be, a bye week team once out of 4 years than being a wild card team 4 times, is basically a good way to think about it. So a lot of my advice is structured around what is the fastest way to get to you being an actually elite contender.
Yeah, that's right. I totally agree. I think if you can tear it down and you kind of reload, then you can go for it, and you can pick up pieces along the way and build that championship team that you desire.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is, I guess, actually, rather than just going through all these pages, we can go into your questions. Actually, let's just show this page before we get into some of the more specific questions. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just showing your most and least owned players. This is helpful for really any whenever you start having like 5+ teams. This is helpful because it does tell you if you're a little bit over or underweight on any certain players or types of players. Like one thing I noticed on your team is that you don't have 3 or more shares of any of the elite quarterbacks, but you do have 0 shares of kind of 4 of the top 8 quarterbacks. Now that's not shocking given that a lot of your teams you're building up young, and you can see, you have 2 Richardson shares and 2 Herbert shares and 2 Deshaun Watson shares. But that was one interesting thing I noticed looking at this team. And then the other thing that we have here is just your team stages like summarized down here. So you can see you basically have 6 teams that are tanking or a year away. You have 3 more teams at various stages of the rebuild, and then you have 1 team that's kind of like old and contending.
Yeah, I'd love to be getting some Burrow and Chase shares or Hurts. It seems like if I'm not taking an orphan, I've been lucky enough to get the 101, and not too many people have been wanting to tear off Patrick Mahomes. So I guess I just have to ride with him as my QB1.
Yeah. I mean, there are worse things to have.
That's right.
And then I know you've played with me, or you've subscribed to me during last season, but one of the things that these also have during the season, it'll have projected winnings as well, which I know for many of my patrons, who have a decent amount of money in this, it can be helpful to see how much you can be expecting. And obviously a lot of that is dependent on just the last 2 weeks of the year, but I found last season it was actually pretty accurate. And of course that's all coming from my model as well.
And that's great. Yeah. Cause we all want to know that we're eventually going to see some returns on the game that we play.
Yeah. I had this idea once to, at one point I was thinking about like, could I sell some certain teams for profit and stuff? Cause I'm in too many leagues. It's not something I'm going to end up doing. But at one point I was going through like and built a discounted cash flow, cause I'm a whatever finance nerd, about like what I could project all my like portfolio and teams out to be. It was pretty much a waste of time, but it was fun to do. All right, so
Okay.
let's get to some more of your questions.
Hey. So first up, how do you use your rankings to decide when you should rebuild or when you should retool? Oops.
Yeah, so I think the way that I like to do this, and we'll go to your overall diagnostic for some examples. Maybe this is actually, this is actually the better page. So this is the page I would recommend because all it shows you are your ranks, your dynasty league ranks, and your ranks against the average. So in general, I am not if you have a dynasty rank or dynasty above average where you are way in the positive, so you have one of the most valuable dynasty teams already. So let's say you're either first, second, or third in league rank, and you're 20+% above average, like you have for 5 of your teams. Those teams, I'm thinking, I have enough value on these teams. I would like to build a dynasty here, and basically, so I have a team stage. Well, you can see you don't have any of them yet. You'll get there at some point. But one of my team stages is Dynasty. And, less than 3% of all of the teams that I look at are in this stage. But that's where you want to get to. So if I already have a ton of Dynasty value, I'm top in the league, something like that, then I really am just looking to build up my redraft league rank slowly. I am not looking to push anything all in. I'm saying I have so much value, it'll naturally lead to production, right? Like that's saying you have guys like Anthony Richardson, guys like Treylon Burks, who might be valuable in Dynasty, but it's going to take them a year or two to get valuable in redraft. In those cases, I'm kind of building organically, regardless of whether I'm, 12th in redraft league rank or 9th in redraft league rank. I'm never looking to convert that into win now talent, because if I'm first in dynasty league rank and 9th in redraft league rank, in order to compete, I would be maybe 6th in dynasty league rank and then 3rd in redraft league rank. And that's a worse position to be in. It's better to just let this grow organically.
That's right.
The times where I'm looking to potentially go all in could be a time like, let's say winter is coming here. Now, I need to look at your team more specifically, but which I can do now. If it was possible to win one season, like you're 6th in league rank, 0% above average, you are pretty far away from becoming a dominant dynasty team. So if you could get 1 year of contention out of it, and this smash accept 7 is another good example of it. Same with ADP is for chumps. Instances where your dynasty league rank is just mediocre as it is, if you have, my first instinct is to compete if you have a chance to do it. Now, if you don't have a chance, my second instinct is to tear it down. And usually that's what's beneficial anyways. But if you could hypothetically get this redraft league rank up into the top 2, like you did for Smash Accept 7, then it's okay to put together a 1 or 2 year window and then end up rebuilding. So it kind of, obviously these two, you're always sacrificing one for another. It kind of just depends what's going to be the most profitable there. So we can go to winter is coming.
Yeah, this was one of my most recent startups,
Okay.
and ended up doing something a little bit different. I really locked in.
Mahomes and Herbert.
Mahomes and Herbert, and then I traded up to get Kyle Pitts as well. So I really voided those 24 draft picks to lock in those 3 elite assets.
Yeah, and this is obviously a team in a different situation where you don't have your 2024 first or second. And where at least your starting lineup, as you can see up here, I mean, this starting lineup could be elite if you just look at this. Now, you don't have any depth, and you need a guy like Rachaad White to do well in order to perform. But given you don't have your 2024 firsts, you really do need to go for the win now. So this is an interesting situation where your options to get more depth are either to downgrade at quarterback, which I don't necessarily recommend, although it's an option. You could downgrade off Kyle Pitts or Devonta Smith. Kyle Pitts, I think he's not going to get you what he should at this point, so I wouldn't trade him. Devonta Smith, if you could get, like if we flip to my rankings over here, if you could get a guy like, a guy in this tier 5, like Cooper Kupp, and get a guy in like a Sky Moore or Rashad Bateman, then maybe you do it. But you would really need someone to be buying high in order to accomplish something like that, right? Like if you could replace Devonta Smith's production with Devontae Adams and then pick up a Rashad Bateman to get younger and get more depth, then that's a move I do. But otherwise, and I think this is what I recommended here, yeah, I would just wait until October. Basically, wait to see what your team looks like a few months into the season. And you might have to, it's hard to tank without your pick, but you might have to do a quick little retool. But I think this team is probably competitive, at least for the first few months. And then you can figure out whether you need to get a little bit more depth.
Yeah, I agree. That's where I also will probably drop in another diagnostic right around that week 4.
Yeah.
See how I'm sitting, see how my players are. If injuries occurred, I'll reassess from there. Maybe week 7 or 8, depending how it goes. Now that I have more teams, my portfolio is growing, I might drop another diagnostic then, just to kind of check in and see that I can maximize the team's potentials.
Yeah, makes sense. Sorry, I realized that we were on a different question. Does that kind of answer your question for how to consider when to rebuild and when to compete? I mean, I think the other thing I would say is that basically, to summarize, you need to get this Dynasty League rank as high as possible, because what this gives you is flexibility, right? What this is telling you is that you could win this year. Like in this Dynasty Patreon League, either of them, you could probably be the favorite this year if you just converted all of your win future assets into win now assets and wanted to compete for one season. But obviously that's not recommended. What you need to do is get this as high as possible in order to get the redraft league rank to basically follow as a lagging indicator behind it.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I've been looking at it as well, trying to see where I'm sitting for Dynasty and just assessing that redraft league rank, seeing when is the time to buy in, and then kind of what players I want to be targeting there. If I want to go after Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, we know the big point producers, but their shelf life might not be as much as we expect. Or should I be targeting that next tier down, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson?
Yeah, and this is kind of where the team stages can come into play as well. So, and this is where a year away versus tanking kind of makes a difference, is if you're a year away, I'm comfortable getting basically any of these receivers in this tier 3, which for those just listening is Wilson, Waddle, Olave, London, Smith. Even some of these receivers in tier 10, like Jahan Dotson, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk. Like those are wide receivers I consider as pretty solid value. It's pretty safe value. I don't expect it to go significantly up or down. In general, I'm more interested in the like Christian Watson, Treylon Burks, Jordan Addison types, because I do want to look for that upside. But if you think you're going to be competing in the next year or two, and really this young contender and young playoff hopeful team stages come in as well, if you think you're going to be competing, there's nothing wrong with owning 25-year-old wide receivers, especially, or if we go to the running back rankings, like basically if you're in the tanking stage, you don't want to own any running backs. If you're in the year away stage, you can own Javonte, you can own Achane, you can own Charbonnet, but you shouldn't be owning really any of these higher guys, even a guy like Travis Etienne, because like the upside there is that he has a good season, but he's still going to be an iffy value going into next year with Tank Bigsby there. He's going to be 25 years old all of a sudden now. You just wasted one season of production. So as you know from my philosophy, I basically don't want to roster any running backs if I'm in any type of rebuild. But especially if you're a year away or tanking or, rough shape tank hard. Those are the leagues where you probably want to just be acquiring future firsts, or as I say, players who are undervalued due to artificial reasons, which are, injuries, suspensions, some weird team situation. They play Call of Duty too much, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too. I've kind of built my teams off that philosophy where I'm not getting the running backs, excluding the ones that you had mentioned, until I'm ready to compete. I'm not going to buy Austin Eckler or Saquon Barkley until I know that I'm sitting, week 8, 9, and I need that piece to go all in. I think that's my missing piece, whether that's moving a pick or some younger assets, but I need to be almost 100% guaranteed to win my league to go out and get those horses.
Yeah, yep. I definitely think that's the right way to think about it. And I do, as you know, I give these suggestions throughout my diagnostics. So on basically every page, I'm giving you some ideas for different players you can acquire. So for instance, that winners coming league we talked about earlier, where you have Mahomes and Herbert and Pitts, and you don't have a lot of depth. One of the suggestions I gave you was you could move a guy like Herbert, get a guy like, Geno Smith or Kirk Cousins, a quarterback, pick up a guy like Tony Pollard and Saquon Barkley, and get a first on top of it or something like that, where you're kind of balancing. All right, I'm getting win now production with Geno or Cousins. I'm getting some win now production with Ramondre, but he's also pretty young. And then I'm also getting a first round pick to make sure that I'm keeping, some flexibility going forward. Now, I think you might even be able to get more than that for Herbert, depending on what the first looks like. But that's kind of what some of these suggestions below will give you some ideas in terms of who to target.
Right, and I love those suggestions because again, that keeps me on track. I can look at a team and say, "Oh, I really want to make this trade. I want to go and try and buy Garrett Wilson." He's great to have, but unfortunately, he might not be worth the price for that team because it's going to set me back what I've been trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And this team's a good example of that. Like if this team, if you had your 2024 first and second, I would probably tell you to go get a guy like Garrett Wilson, right? I'd say trade Derrick Henry and Ridley for Garrett Wilson, take a year or two off, build around Mahomes, Herbert, and Kyle Pitts and Devonta Smith and go that route. But the way that this team is now without your 24 first, you're probably better off contending for a year, maybe 2 years if you're lucky, and then kind of rebuilding once you have your picks under team control.
yeah, that's right. I also wanted to know when we're doing uh well, most of my teams that I've picked up are orphans. So I'm having to rebuild. So how do I use, whether it be the power ranking tables or the diagnostics, just to kind of look at targets in the league who might have that false hope that they're
Yeah.
going to be a competing team, but you might be able to take advantage of that and get a potential top 5 or even a top 3 pick from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question and definitely one that is very important. So let's use the same winner as coming league. I know you're not necessarily trying to acquire a first there, but I mean, the first two teams that stick out to me like a sore thumb are Dynasty Jacobian and Ricky Business. So for those of you not watching the video, Jacobian's got a team here with the weighted average age of 26 years old. He is 4th in redraft league rank, and he is 11th in dynasty league rank. So what that tells me is that Jacobian's got a team where and also because we all know Jacobian, he thinks he's competing. He's only the 4th best team, though, and he doesn't have a lot of dynasty value, meaning that he has basically no way to improve his team. So I look at this and say, Jacobian thinks he's making the playoffs. People are going to value his pick as a 24 first, value his 24 first as a playoff team, but there is downside here. I also assume that Jacobian does not own his own first because he never does. So it's possible that you're acquiring this first from a different team, meaning you're not even helping Jacobian's team in that trade, which is another thing to consider. So that would be a pick that I'm targeting. Another way to do it is go target his 25 first because he has the worst dynasty value. He has an aging team and he doesn't have his picks or any way to make it better. That's another way where you can target his 25 first. People are looking at it saying, all right, I assume he has Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. They're going to say, oh, he's got 2 RB1s. It's not going to be an early pick, but we know that it might end up being that. The other one that sticks out to me for similar reasons is Ricky Business. I mean, his age is almost 28 years old, yet he's only third in redraft rank and he is 12th in dynasty rank. So that's another guy I would be looking at targeting his future picks, for similar reasons. In general, I want to be targeting picks where their dynasty league rank is pretty low because it means that they, first of all, might not be building that good of a team. This is nothing against Jacoby and a Ricky Business, who I both played with a bunch and both do a very good job, but I'm just looking at one specific league. And you also want to look at teams who have both redraft rank and dynasty rank somewhere in the middle. So Lindy, Jay Block, and Aditya stand out to me, where their dynasty rank and redraft ranks are all between 5 and 9, which means they probably think that they are contending, but it's very possible they don't contend, and they don't have a ton of value to recoup to get that back. I mean, nothing personal, but to be honest, your pick is probably one I would be looking to target if I was trying to pick up a pick in this league, because you're kind of a borderline playoff team. You only have you have like 3 superstars, basically: Mahomes, Herbert, and Pitts. You got Derrick Henry, but if Mahomes and Derrick Henry get hurt, your pick is going to be high. So that's probably, if you were a different guy, a pick I would look to target here.
Right, absolutely. And that's how I read these two when I'm trying to tear down teams, is just kind of those middling teams in both redraft and dynasty. Do you also put any value into the positional ranks that you have just to the right? The QB rank, RB rank. Do you use that when you're targeting certain teams? Guys that might be running back needy?
Yeah, I definitely do. Let me flip to a different league where I might have recommended that you sell off a little bit. So ADP is for chumps. Your team stage is hit rebuild button. So let's go to that league. So in this league, you are 6th in redraft, but was this a orphan you took over?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So you're 6th in redraft, right about average, 4% below average in terms of value, but you're 11th in dynasty, 28% below average. It's pretty clear what happened here. This team's got Ramondre, Chubb, Derrick Henry, James Conner, Cooper Kupp. Someone was trying to go win now. They probably didn't do it. They don't have a ton of value anymore, so they ditched. And like the saint you are, you took over the orphan. So this is the type of team where I would be recommending to hit the rebuild button, as the team stage says. And what you have here, this is probably a full teardown, because you have guys like Ramondre, Chubb, Derrick Henry, Derek Carr, Cooper Kupp, Dallas Goedert. All these guys, their value really cannot go up, but all of them can get you a first-round pick, if not more, at this point. So what I would do here is I would say, all right, let's start with running back, where you have Stevenson, Chubb, Henry, and Connor. I'm going to flip to the league power rankings. I'm going to take a look at redraft and say, what are the best redraft teams that have the worst running back situation? So Noah, Dan, good job here. He's got this true dynasty here. Well done. In second place, we got Bird Gang, whose running backs are pretty good. Third place, we got Dynasty Rest, whose running backs are pretty good. But here in fourth place, we got Bulldog Gamer, who is an aging contender team stage. His average age is 28 years old, and his running backs are 7th in the league in redraft rankings and 9th in the league in dynasty rankings. He also, by the way, is 11th in the league in wide receivers. So what that tells me is that Bulldog Gamer is going for it. He's got an old team with aging players, and he needs help at running back and wide receivers. So if I go back to your team, he's probably interested in Cooper Kupp and Juju Smith-Schuster. He's definitely interested in Chubb and Derrick Henry and James Conner. So it's a good way, rather than having to, especially in the offseason where there's no standings to look at, so you don't know who's win now and who's rebuilding. It's a really good way to just say, all right, this team's going for it. They're old. They're pretty good in redraft, and they need wide receivers. He's the first guy I'm going to hit up for Cooper Kupp.
And that's exactly how I use these rankings. I went And I did. This was a hard team to diagnose, honestly.
It was.
I didn't know if I wanted to spend some draft capital and try and get a quarterback and try and take a run at it. I ended up tearing it down. So uh, shout out to Noah Green for getting me in this league because it's been a blast. The league is just they're a bunch of great guys. They're active, whether it's in the chat or on the trades.
And shout out to Noah Green's team. He is in the 100th percentile for redraft value and the 98th percentile for dynasty value. I don't have the Excel open here, so I can't look at his team. But who is on his team? Because it looks unbelievable.
It's a monster. It's
Yeah.
Just to paraphrase it, look at the top of your rankings. If they're in the top 10, he's gone. It's an absolute monster.
And by the way, this is another interesting thing to look at because you said earlier you were considering going for it, and I don't blame you because you have 4 elite running backs here. You have Cooper Kupp, you have Goddard and Carr. It's an okay redraft team. But when you flip to the power rankings and you see Noah has an unbelievable behemoth both in redraft and dynasty, you need to take a step back and say, I need to get so freaking lucky to compete. It's better for me to take a year or two off. Maybe he gets a few injuries, and most importantly, build up your dynasty value so you can actually compete with a behemoth like that.
That's exactly what it was. I bowed out. I figured I'd sit on the bench and watch this one and gain assets because you're right. If everything has to align to be able to take a run at Noah's.
Yeah, absolutely. You were saying, what did you end up doing trade wise for this team?
I ended up trading. I made a big one with Noah. Actually, I traded him Ramondre, Cooper Kupp, and Dallas Goddard for Drake London, a 24 first that wasn't his, and Chig. That was the first trade that was kind of a splash, as Dynasty Dad would put it. That was my splash trade, and then I started chipping away and creating a running back void. And I sold off. I took these notes so I could stay on track.
Yeah.
And stick to the game plan. I wasn't too worried whether I got a 24 or a 25-1 because at this point, a first is a first. I just want to get that void. I targeted the teams that are kind of middling in both dynasty and redraft rankings, and I just went to work on them. So now my only running backs are James Conner. I have Chuba and some rookies. My quarterback, I think I drafted Will Levis in this league, so I don't really even have a starting quarterback. And that's it. Now my wide receiver core will be Devontae Smith and Drake London. I have Dalton Kincaid, and I just started to chip away. I made a thread on it on Twitter, and it was all really using this diagnostics that was just a cheat sheet essentially for me. Gave me a good guideline.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was glad it's working for you. Whose first round picks do you have now? I'm curious.
I'll have to pull up my sleeper.
All right, cool.
Yeah, it's I have Bulldog Gamers first in 24, and I have Druzel 91.
Nice. So that's an aging contender and a team I'm recommending to hit the rebuild button who's has 27 and a half years old. So those are two teams who could easily blow up. A lot of upside to those picks.
Absolutely. And then I grabbed Austin Lee 87 and 25 and D Wilkes 92.
All right. So that Austin Lee is going to be the 25-101. Maybe. I mean, he's 11th in redraft rank with a 28-year-old team and 12th in dynasty rank. So his team is in the 2nd percentile of dynasty rankings. So that's a good looking pick. That could be quite valuable.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It was really hard to decide what to do, and I just used your notes that you put a lot of work into on all of these, and I just stuck to it. I'm going to use it as this season as a teardown and start to eventually build up. And if I have to move some capital around, so be it. and hopefully this team will be having a winning record and hopefully a bye week in a couple seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to read part of what I said in terms of the content, just for those who are not looking. My advice here was this team's a bit lost, and I can't say it any better than the team stage does. It's time to hit the reset button. Don't be enticed by your older running backs with only one quarterback and two reliable wideouts. You're looking at a borderline playoff berth, first round exit, and being unable to sell any of these running backs. Do a full transition, trade Carr, your top four running backs, Cup, Juju, Goddard, even a guy like Devontae, who might be at a peak in value, should be made available if you can get Burks, Watson, Quentin Johnson, or Addison with a plus. If you do a good job selling, this is probably a 2-year punt, 1 year to break it down, 1 year to build it up. You generally know the values of these guys. Obviously, these are customized for each person, and I know you know what you're doing. But hit me up for trade advice. Consider asking for 25 firsts instead of 24 for a guy like Chubb or Henry, because it might be more attainable and you still get the value. So sounds like you've taken my advice and run with it quite well. I mean, looking at it now, you got Devonta Smith and Drake London. You have a few picks. I mean, you have 7 picks in the next 2 years now, including likely the 24 101 and then the 25 101 and 102. So yeah, you're in good shape going forward.
Yeah, I'm really liking the way this team has progressed so far, and just gonna keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what other questions you got?
When you're competing, when do you start to dial up your moves? I've made a few moves on a couple of my win now teams, specifically that Vermilion League.
Mm-hmm.
But are you holding on to your first and younger assets closer to playoff time, or are you all in when you decide to go?
Yeah, so this is a good question, when and how to go all in. I think the number one mistake that people make is going all in too late, because as I mentioned, getting a bye week is, let's assume that you have bye weeks in your league. If you don't, this honestly changes quite a bit. But if you have bye weeks in your league, it's so important to get that bye, because the variance week to week of fantasy is massive. So let me see if I can pull up this model. I know it mostly from the top of my head, but basically the idea is if you're projected for 130 points and your opponent is projected for 100, you still only have about a 70% chance of winning that week. And that is the difference between whether you roster Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase or Jacoby Myers and Sky Moore. Like literally, it is 2 elite versus 2 mediocre players is that 30 points in a given week. So no matter how good you make your team, like I said earlier, 1 seeds only have like a 33% chance of winning their league. It might even be like 31. So you need to go get that bye week, because you just get a free win. You don't have to worry about variance for a week. So if you're a team where you have players like here, honestly, where you kind of know Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, and Devonta Smith are going to give you a ton. You know that Ayuk and Ridley, between the two of them, are going to give you another wide receiver 2 at least. You don't really know what you're going to get from Watson, and particularly the Lance Purdy combo, but you're probably going to get 2 decent quarterbacks out of there. So at this point, you could look at this roster and say, I don't have any running backs, but if you added Ramondre Stevenson and Tony Pollard to this team, 2 running backs who will probably be in the top 12 this season, this team is really competitive. Like, it's a contender. I mean, the reason it's 9th in redraft ranks isn't because you don't have any talent. It's because you don't have any talent at running backs. So it's a situation where if I'm relying, let's say I'm coming out of a rebuild and I'm a young contender, and I'm relying on players like, so I'm going to pull up one of these teams. Let's say, I guess you don't really have any of those, but let's say you're relying on players like Jahmyr Gibbs to perform this year, or you're relying on Treylon Burks and Christian Watson, or Kyle Pitts is a big part of your team. Like, those teams, I'm more likely to wait until October, let's say, to see how good my team is. Because if those rookies are good, then maybe I'm contending and then I want to make a win now trade for Tony Pollard. But if those guys are bad, I'm going to be pissed if I gave away my first for Tony Pollard at the beginning of the season. So a lot of that just depends on the stability of kind of the key players in your roster in terms of when to go all in, meaning, before the season versus the trade deadline. In terms of whether your team is ready to go all in, a lot of what I've said earlier is kind of the key to that, but it's about evaluating the best teams in your league and how they compare to your teams. I mean, one of the good shorthands is look at redraft ADP. You need 5 of the top 36 and you need 7 of the top 60 or so in order to really be competitive in a league. So just be honest with yourself. Look at some sources like that. Look at this diagnostic and really just see where you shape up. But always keep in mind that at the worst, you want to make a value neutral deal. So when I recommend to make a win now deal, I'm not saying trade Treylon Burks for DeAndre Hopkins, right? If you look at the rankings, it's trading, Treylon Burks for Stephon Diggs or trading Treylon Burks for Devontae Adams, right? Like it's moves like that where you're getting the same value, give or take. And my rankings are always slanted towards youth. So if I'm saying the age is relatively equal to the youth, then it's probably a decent deal.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that totally. I did end up making a few moves on this Vermilion League.
Yeah.
We had a home league. We had a week that was just a little bit crazy there. So I ended up packaging. I made some win now moves. I figured, I have the horses at wide receiver. I ended up drafting Bijan. I was lucky enough to trade, and the pick turned into the 101. I traded Bryce Young for Jahmyr Gibbs in a first. So my running backs are there. I acquired Eckler or James Cook plus in a bigger deal. I know you're happy with that because my James Cook exposure is much too high.
Yeah.
And I traded Trey Lance and Chig in a package for Kyler Murray and Tyler Algier.
Nice.
So I'm going all in this league. I'm tired of the guys at work giving me grief that I'm not competing. I have one team that's 0-14 and I have another middling team. So I put the pedal to the metal and I'm going for it in this league now.
And I think what you did that was smart here was that, first of all, you got Bijan, right? You got the 101, you drafted Bijan. So now you're like, do I waste a year of Bijan or do I go win now? Then you got an awesome deal for Bryce Young where you got Jahmyr Gibbs in a first. Amazing value, by the way. So then now you all of a sudden have another running back. So my analysis before, where you got the wideouts, you kind of have the quarterbacks, and you have Kyle Pitts. Now you add Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs to it, and you're able to make a win now move for Eckler, which I totally endorse because you're already first in dynasty value, and you just added Bijan and Gibbs. So you have such a leg up and you have enough young elite assets in Bijan, Gibbs, Kyler, Deshaun, Jefferson, Devonta, Treylon. Like you have enough of these young studs, Pitts, that it's okay to convert some of that into win now talent. And I think you picked a really good time and a good way to go about doing that.
Yeah.
Do you have another quarterback other than Watson and Kyler? Because I would recommend getting one because I don't know when Kyler's going to play.
I'm working on it. It's even for a 10-man league. It's right now the prices are super inflated. So I'm just gonna sit back and keep looking at this model and be advantageous when I can be. I have some extra draft capital if need be, but hopefully by week 4 that extra quarterback slot is figured out.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I like about that I would recommend using in this diagnostic is, there's a few teams in this league who probably think they're competing, especially if it's a work league, who are going to turn out not to compete. And guys like Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Geno Smith, Ryan Tannehill, Aaron Rodgers, they get super cheap once a team falls out of contention. So it's okay if you need to wait a little bit. You have a good enough team, you're not really going to fall too far behind. I would see if you could go pick up, Clayton Tune and McCoy, just to see if Kyler's out at the beginning of the season. Maybe go pick up like Ryan Tannehill, just because he's cheap as hell. I don't know if he's cheap as hell in this league, but typically he is. But yeah, you're in good shape, and I wouldn't be surprised if this team, as soon as, later this season, is a dynasty, like team stage dynasty team, because it's right there. And I bet if I ran it again right now, it would be, young contender at least.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just gonna keep chipping away at it, and hopefully some good things pan out for me.
Yep.
My other question for you is, how often do you reassess your teams personally? Obviously, you have a massive portfolio compared to us. So are you kind of picking a team a week that you're gonna diagnose and you're gonna work on? Or is it less than that? Is it just kind of when you get the itch or you see something on Twitter that you're gonna go after?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've about 90 teams. I don't even know at this point because I got some drafts going on right now, but give or take. So I run my own diagnostic, every week or so. Just the numbers part of it, in my model, I run that about every week just because I like to have it on hand. Anytime I get a trade offer, the first thing I don't even look at my team on my sleeper page. The first thing I do is I open my diagnostic and I look at where I'm at in my redraft and my dynasty value, and I look at my team stage. Of course, if it's not a terrible offer, which most opening offers are nowadays. In terms of when I actually because I don't go through every one of my teams every time I diagnose it, of course. I'm just updating the underlying numbers and rosters and stuff like that. Typically what I'll do is in the off season, like now when not a whole lot is going on. I mean, since I started getting more into content, I have more going on, but I try to take a team a day, give or take, look at my diagnostic and say, all right, here, if this weren't me, if I was talking to Dane and was trying to give him advice, here's what I would say, try to get younger, try to make a void at running back, try to do this at tight end. I just try to give that advice to myself. I write it down, like you said, so I hold myself accountable. I look at what the, league power rankings are. And I just spend a day trying to make moves. So typically, I found that posting guys on the trade block, you only get buy lows. Like you only get really shitty offers. So I don't even use the trade block that much. Usually what I try to do is, let's say my advice to myself is, get younger. You need to tank for a season. I go to my dynasty rankings. I look at Cooper Kupp. I say, who's around Cooper Kupp? All right, I'm going to send an offer for everyone from Garrett Wilson and Amon Ra all the way down to, probably not Zay Flowers, Jerry Jeudy and Jamison Williams or Quentin Johnston, right? And I just send offers blind to 10 different teams, or maybe the same team owns several of them. But I'm saying, Kupp for Amon Ra, and I'll throw in, maybe it's Aaron Jones, or I'll say Kupp for Quentin Johnston, and you throw in a second round pick. And I just send all those out blind. And usually by the end of the day, I've been able to negotiate a few trades I'm happy with. And that's kind of the way I go about things. The other times I do massive movements with my portfolio is if someone else posts stuff on the trade block, I usually gotta be honest, I am one of those guys that sends out a slightly buy low offer because I figure, why are you on the trade block if you're not trying to sell low? And then sometimes, whether it's based on film work I'm doing or data work that I'm doing, I'll say, I think that this guy's too cheap. For instance, I was talking earlier on my wide receiver breakout podcast. There was one that, as I was talking about it, both my guest and I, Daniel Harms, check it out, by the way, good podcast, was we both came to the conclusion that this guy was a pretty big buy and had a potential to break out in 2023. I'm intentionally not saying the name because I'm got to send out some offers this afternoon. So then I'll just go to all of my leagues and literally send out an offer in every league. Just go one by one. or maybe not all of them, but as many as I can get to in my time, taking a break from work on the toilet. So kind of just depends, but that's the general way I go about things.
Right, I love it because I'm the exact same. I get a trade, I'm immediately getting into my Gmail, I'm pulling up these rankings, this diagnostic, and seeing how it fits my team. If it doesn't fit my plan, I'm probably going to be more hesitant on it. I don't see myself ever changing a plan unless I can buy an elite asset for cheap. But this is exactly what I'm doing. Is what you showed. If I can stay in a same tier or drop to a tier below, maybe pay extra to get a tier up, as long as it sticks to my plan and I can execute what I wanted, I'm listening to it.
Yeah, and the one
I
go ahead. Sorry.
I just think it's funny that we're doing the same thing. I'm glad that I think I'm doing the same thing as you here.
Yeah, man. I mean, even in the last like 6 months, I've seen your portfolio really, especially the non-orphans that you took over. Like you're really getting good at developing these strategies, and now it's just execution is the next step. The one other thing I did want to say is that trade offers. Yes, your team matters, but if you are winning a trade on value and you know that your league doesn't have a reason to dislike a certain player or player type, then I'm okay just accepting any offers. So there are many offers I accept that are not in line with my strategy, like team specific strategy, that I accept purely because of the value play. Just make sure not to forget the second step of that, which is to cash in on that value. Because sometimes you could forget about that. Like, for instance, Alexander Madison was incredibly cheap in April, which made no sense because everyone knew Dalvin Cook was getting cut. And then it got it. So it would have been a very good idea to acquire Alexander Madison in April. Then just make sure to actually cash in on that value when you sell him in June and he's not left stuck on your roster in November when he's their third string running back, which, by the way, is not my prediction. It's just a hypothetical. So, yeah, it's really you got to look at your team in the context of all trades except for the truly kind of dumb offers that you might receive in a good way.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I've really have been trying to do that as well. Again, with your notes, if I have certain players, some elite handcuffs that we're kind of looking into now, the Jalen Warrens, the Jerome Ford, the OTA hypes are coming. One of those guys make a one-handed grab, or they look like they're running some crisp routes. Like I'm waiting for the hype, and I'm waiting for league mates to come and try and grab one of those guys, because some people still value owning those handcuffs. And for myself, that's normally rebuilding, retooling. I'm trying to just grab a handcuff. When the hype comes, I sell, grab another handcuff, I sell, rinse and repeat, get that draft capital. And that seems how I can accelerate getting my team into the build that I wanted.
Yeah, no, that's the perfect way to do it. Really that's like basically just how you have to go about building a team on a rebuild. Like, only roster running backs who are scoring 0 points, and the minute the starter gets hurt and they're about to score points, you sell them for a second round pick. I have a situation, my favorite one of those. I think it was when I know one of them was James Robinson. I sold him at his hype, and then I used that roster spot, sold, I think it was Malik Davis at his hype and Samaje Perine at his height last year, and I turned those 3 picks this year into Jackson Smith-Njigba. Like, there's a whole path that I was mapping out where it was like a 2-year path where I acquired like 4 second-round picks and then flipped them all into the 106. So there are these gains might seem marginal, but they're important nonetheless. And what you say about the roster churning with backup running backs is spot on. That's the right way to build, and then you get more roster spots to take more chances on other guys. Especially I've noticed in my diagnostics a surprising number of my followers or patrons have leagues where there's only 18, 19, 20 roster spots. So there's a guy like guy like Jaylen Warren might be on waivers. So you can, if there's some hype, you sell him and then pick up, instead of Jaylen Warren, let's go to the running back rankings. Chase Brown off waivers. And then when he gets a starting job because Joe Mixon gets hurt, pick up Malik Davis on waivers and just rinse and repeat.
Yeah, I love it. That just means that you have to be an active owner. You need to understand what's going on when waivers flip, what players are wanting. Most of us have Twitter now. We follow mostly each other because it seems like we all play in or frequent each other in the same league. So we're all in here. So it depends how much you want to put into your teams and reap those rewards.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I got about 5 minutes left before I got another call. You got any last few questions for me?
No, that was my last one, actually.
Awesome.
I wanted to thank you for this opportunity because it's awesome, man, to get on to a phone call and chop this up with you has been great. You've had me since day one, since I had my little home league and didn't know anything, and you've always been in the DMs. You've always helped me out, always steered me right. It's awesome to see your Discord growing, all your podcasts. I love seeing the success. So thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, man. Thank you. And I know I've said this to you offline, but having the loyal supporters who are just, great people and seeing them learn and, start to create content themselves is really what makes it all worth it for me. So thanks for always pushing my work all this time. And it's been great having you on this pod. And we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot.
All right. See ya.
Bye.